You know, usually preachers begin the new year by talking about the New Year's resolutions that each and every one of us in our culture has the opportunity to make at the dawning of a new year. Now, I know this is the second Sunday of the new year, and I probably suspect that many of us who did make New Year's resolutions on the 1st of January have already broken those New Year's resolutions by now. The reality is that more than 70% of folks who make New Year's resolutions break them within the first 2 weeks of a new year. That's a statistic that I just found on Google as I was looking around this week of what's going on in our culture. And that by the end of January, more than 90% of us have broken those New Year's resolutions that we made. Now, I do believe that New Year's resolutions are a great thing for us. I think that they can help us about our intention of what this new year is going to be like. But the reality is that if we don't keep them, or if they don't become that significantly important to us, then what's the use of making those New Year's resolutions? I found that in my own experience, I've broken those New Year's resolutions over and over again. In fact, the only New Year's resolution that I managed to keep was a New Year's resolution that I made with Rev. Dr. Troy Perry more than 3 years ago, and that was to lose weight. And if you remember, that we actually began the new year by preaching a series of sermons called Lose the Weight. And we talked about lose the weight of guilt and shame and pain and all those things of our lives. And that was the only New Year's resolution that I've managed to keep in my entire 42 years of life. And I want to say, I did lose 65 pounds in a 2-year period. And if anyone's seen Reverend Troy Perry recently, you will see that he's lost well over 100 pounds in a 3-year period. He looks fantastic. I want to tell you, he looks almost as good now as he did when he was back 40 years ago, and he was that little twink here in Los Angeles with those fabulous sideburns, if everyone's ever seen any of those pictures of him. Right. I wish he was here to hear that comment. Perhaps, well, make sure he gets that. Might put me in his good books for a little while. New Year's resolutions. It's never too late for us to make a fresh start is the sermon series that we're engaging in these next 4 weeks. And my hope is in these next 4 weeks we're going to begin to understand that it really is never too late for us to make that fresh start in our lives, and that we don't have to wait until January the 1st to make New Year's resolutions. That we as Christians have the opportunity to make those fresh starts every single day of our lives. You know, the reality is, as a pastor, and I speak for many of the pastors who are here present, we get to hear the life stories of so many of the members of our church. And not just the life stories of members of our church, but the life stories of so many folks who come in during the week, or who find us to make appointments with us, or use the opportunity just to sit down with us and talk about what's going on in their own life right at this very moment. And during the Advent series, we talked a lot about some of the economic disasters that are happening in our lives, and some of the pain that's happening in our lives, and especially for those of us or those of you who are in retirement and who are struggling now because your retirement funds have just been cut, and those of us who live on investments. I mean, just all of the agony that's going on in people's lives. And you know, we've made ourselves available to not only talk about those things, but to find ways in which we can make practical solutions to help one another. And it's been incredible that so many of the folks, and I mean this very sincerely, but many of the folks who have been generous benefactors to this church, many of the folks who often give food for our homeless work and for the work that we have in our community, are the same people now who are needing help from us. And we're finding that echoed in so many of the agencies around the city. I was talking with people from APLA, and they were saying over and over again that their services are being called upon now more in this new year than ever before in the years past, because folks who used to have the money to be able to fund themselves are now finding that they need just that little bit extra. And so it's really a time for us all to come together and to really support one another in so many different ways, perhaps in ways that we never thought possible. And I want to tell you, some of those folks, because of our own personal pride and because we don't like to ask for help, it really takes great courage to reach out and to say, I'm the one now that needs help. And I want to encourage you, if that's your situation here in our church this morning, if you feel that you need something, I want to encourage you to just take one of the pastors to one side and just to let us know, because, we're not mind readers, much as you might hope that we are, but, it's really is incumbent upon us to be able to offer that support and that help and to reach out to you. It's never too late to make a fresh start. That was just an info commercial in the midst of this sermon. I know it really had nothing to do with that, but I really felt that I needed to say that to us this morning. It's never too late to make a fresh start. You know how sometimes God will speak to you through those conversations that you have with individuals? And this week I had 2 conversations with individuals that were so powerful, that reminded me of the basic truth of Scripture, that we live in the now, that we don't live in our yesterdays, and we can't live in our tomorrows, for we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but that we really must live in the now. The scripture reading taken from the book of Genesis reminded me that God lived one day at a time. If you look at the whole of the story of creation, God created the creation. The story says created in a 7-day period. On the 7th day, God rested. Now, we don't know what those days looked like, and we don't know if they were 24-hour days, and that's not really the purpose of this dialogue this morning. But that God lived one day at a time, looked at what God was able to do in that one day, and eventually looked back and said, that was good. That was a good day. And God didn't reminisce about what God had done yesterday. God was ready to get up the next day and do something new and something creative, one day at a time. This morning's scripture from the lectionary talks about the baptism of Jesus. And in many ways, the baptism of Jesus was a new beginning for Jesus. To put to bed everything that had gone on in the previous existence and to start afresh and to start anew. We have that opportunity every day that we get up in the morning. We have the opportunity to begin a fresh day and a new day. Not concerned so much about what yesterday looked like and what tomorrow is going to bring, but to live in the now, in the very present moment. Those 2 conversations that I had this week reminded me of the now of Jesus, and reminded me of the now that we are called to live in, and to know that we have the opportunity to make a fresh start every day. The 2 stories were very sad. On Thursday, the staff and I got together and we were able to get out to go on our Christmas dinner. And there's nowhere in town that's now serving Christmas dinner, so it was really breakfast and lunch, and we called it Christmas dinner. But it was our opportunity just to get together and to kind of think about what had happened over Christmas. And just before I was about to leave the office with our staff, a phone rang and they asked if they could speak to me. And a man was on the other end of our phone who had made a New Year's resolution to work on his spirituality and had started coming to MCC. And he spoke to me very briefly for a moment as he told me about his 23-year-old cousin who lives not in LA, but somewhere a little bit more remote. And that young man had just taken his own life because he had self-identified as a gay man. And just a week ago, he said he'd spoken to his cousin who he treated more like a brother. And he sat there and he spoke to him. And he said, when does the pain hurt? When does the pain stop? When does this all end?